In this story, a brave nurse gets caught in a dangerous conspiracy when an attack at a supermarket almost kills her. While protecting a veteran, she becomes the target of a secret network that wants to destroy him. With cleverness and determination, Lara fights to survive, facing threats and secrets that will change her life forever. Will she be able to stop those who are after her? Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss stories like this. Let's begin. The rain slammed against the windows of the emergency room, each drop echoing like a drum in the dark night. It was just after 3 a.m., and Nurse Lara Gonzalez was exhausted to the bone. It had been an endless shift. Couples in car accidents on the slippery road, elderly people with hypothermia after being caught in the downpour, and a young woman admitted in critical condition from a drug overdose. Every patient needed her full attention, and for every life she stabilized, Lara felt a new weight on her shoulders, as if the responsibility of saving them was pressing down on her. "Lara, please. We need 4 to transfuse blood to Mrs. Morales," demanded the on-call doctor, his voice tense under his mask. "It's coming, doctor," she replied softly, her hands quick despite the fatigue. 2 minutes, and you'll have your central line." The beeping of the monitors became background music, a frantic rhythm Lara adapted to with the precision of a clock. She adjusted the infusion pump, measured the blood pressure, and calmed the patient's rapid breathing with soft words. "It's going to be okay. Breathe slowly." But inside, the tiredness rose like an unrelenting enemy. Her white coat, stained with splashes of fluid and small bits of dried blood, had stopped being spotless hours ago. When Mrs. Morales's pulse finally stabilized, and the monitor stopped alarming, Lara let out a sigh so deep it felt like her back cracked. Her co-workers had already changed and slipped out through the sliding door. She was alone now, with only the echo of her own footsteps and the faint hum of the machines. She carefully removed her latex gloves, one by one, and tossed them into the red bin. With trembling hands, she patted her cheeks to wake herself up. 5 minutes of rest, she promised herself. She rested her forehead on the counter, closed her eyes, and let the silence envelop her. Then the monitor in the hallway lit up. A stretcher, urgently pushed by an orderly, was heading to the resuscitation room. Lara jumped up, put on her surgical cap, and ran after the team. The adrenaline surged through her veins again. "Prepare to monitor vital signs. We need 2 units of plasma now." After handling the crisis, Lara received more praise, but her muscles were still burning with fatigue, and a sharp pain ran through her neck. Finally, when the monitor showed safe parameters and the stretcher was pushed out of the room, Lara allowed herself a moment of triumph. She checked the event log, wrote down the exact times of each intervention, and signed with a shaky hand. The chief doctor peeked his head through the door. "You've done an excellent job, Lara. Your relief will be here in 10 minutes. Take a break." "Thanks, doctor," she replied with a tired half-smile. "I just need to sit down for a moment." She walked to the break room, where she found a plastic chair next to the foggy window. She took off her coat, revealing her sweat-soaked and rain-drenched t-shirt, and rubbed her arms to warm up. Outside, the storm kept on with its relentless dance. The lightning painted bright arabesques across the night sky. On the street, there were only puddles and flickering streetlights. She brushed a strand of hair off her forehead and glanced at her wristwatch. 3:47 a.m. With an almost audible sigh, Lara stood up and buttoned her coat again. She packed her things in her locker. Her bag on her shoulder, the thermos with warm coffee, and the notebook with a worn cover. She put on her cap like a visor, and without rushing but also without pausing, she headed towards the emergency exit. As her boots crunched on the shiny floor, she felt every step take her closer to the momentary freedom of the night. Though she knew, with that rain, the chaos could be waiting outside the hospital. When she opened the main door, a cold wind hit her, slipping down the neck of her coat and brushing her skin. The rain pelted her face insistently. She leaned back to let the water run off as she carefully closed the umbrella. That's when she saw him. At the foot of the escalator, a solitary figure, hunched over, wearing a military coat dripping with water. His rough, trembling hands clung to the handrail. Lara stopped. Something about that figure whispered to her that this night was far from over. The rain kept pounding the hospital ground and Lara's face as she stopped in front of the hunched figure. The nurse walked over firmly, though deep down she could feel every inch of her body begging for rest. The veteran struggled to hold onto an old water-soaked coat, his trembling hands barely able to grip it. Lara bent down to meet his gaze, which held a flash of vulnerability. "Good evening," she said gently. "Do you need help?" The man lifted his eyes, and his weathered face, marked by time and scars, spoke without words. Beneath the hood, his eyes were red, and his lips parted slightly, each breath shaking as if the cold were cutting through his bones. Lara noticed from a distance that his bare feet were soaked, with socks sticking to his skin. "I need help, please," he whispered with a weak voice. "I can't put one foot in front of the other." The nurse took a step forward and extended her hand. He grasped it tightly, and as he did, his whole body trembled. Carefully, she draped his arm over her shoulders, and with mutual support, they moved toward the main exit. "What's your name?" Lara asked while opening the umbrella to shield them from the downpour. "Gabriel. Gabriel Morales from the Navy," the veteran answered, his accent betraying decades of service. "Thank you. I don't know why I'm here." Lara helped him remove his soaked coat gently to avoid hurting him, then draped it over her shoulders like a cloak of calm. Under the rain, she searched her bag for a clean cloth. She wiped Gabriel's forehead to remove the excess water and sweat. "I'll take you to your car," she said. "Are you alone?" Gabriel nodded awkwardly. Every step he took echoed with pain and exhaustion. Lara guided him to a couple of benches near the entrance, where the ground was less flooded. She sat him down gently, then took out a bottle of water and a couple of rehydration tablets from her bag. "Drink slowly," she instructed. "This will help with the shakes and dehydration." He took the bottle with trembling hands, sipped it, and sighed with relief. Lara watched as the rainwater slid down his back. With a concerned look, she covered his shoulders with a thermal blanket from the break room. "Did you have an accident?" she asked carefully. "No, not exactly," Gabriel replied, closing his eyes for a moment. "I was on my way home when suddenly I felt this strange dizziness. Then darkness." Lara placed a soft hand on his arm and felt the tension in his muscles. There was something more than just fatigue or intoxication. An ancient shadow of fear, as if he were running from a traumatic memory. "I'll take you somewhere warmer," she said with determination. "I know a 24-hour grocery store. We can sit there, have some hot coffee, and call someone to help you." Gabriel looked at her, surprised by the kindness of this nurse he barely knew. "Do you trust a stranger?" he murmured, a tired but grateful smile on his face. "In someone who shares the same profession," Lara replied, giving him a wink. "Come on, I'll take the umbrella." She stood up, and with Gabriel's firm hand resting on her arm, they left the hospital. The emergency lights blinked in the distance, and the sound of the rain hitting the windows competed with the slow tapping of their footsteps. With each heartbeat, Lara felt her pulse quicken with concern. This veteran needed help, and she was determined to give it to him. As they moved toward the parking lot, the nurse couldn't stop thinking about Gabriel's broken words and the fragile strength still emanating from his body. She knew her mission hadn't ended at the emergency door. It had only just begun. Lara tightened her grip on Gabriel's arm, careful not to hurt him as they walked toward the vehicle. The cold wind and rain kept hitting their faces, but the nurse, with her protective instincts, stayed close to the veteran to shield him with her own umbrella. Between the water and the sound of car engines in the parking lot, it was hard to hear each other. Gabriel, Can you hold yourself up? Lara asked, leaning in a little to speak in his ear. I think yes, he replied in a hoarse voice. But I still feel shaky. She looked toward the hospital, where the emergency lights were flashing in the distance. She couldn't leave him there alone again. She also knew they both needed more than just a seat. In her emergency bag, she always carried a small first aid kit with painkillers, bandages, and, most importantly on that cold morning, rehydration salts and a couple of foldable thermal blankets. Without thinking, she quickly rummaged through the pockets and pulled out a bottle of clean water and a couple of packets of rehydration powder. Drink this slowly, she instructed, handing him the bottle. It will help you regain your strength. Gabriel took a slow, grateful sip as Lara opened one of the packets and mixed it with the water. She let him smell the slightly sweet and bitter aroma of the electrolytes. He tilted his head and nodded, accepting the mixture. The parking lot was almost empty, except for a security guard who, from the window of a small booth, stared blankly at the road. Lara quickly noticed that the guard barely reacted to the storm or the presence of a vulnerable veteran. That made her uneasy. They needed a closed, warm place to stabilize Gabriel and figure out what to do next. I have an idea, Lara said as she put the first aid kit back in her bag. There's a supermarket open all night a few blocks from here. We can go in, get some hot water, ibuprofen, and some light food. How does that sound? Gabriel looked at her with curiosity, and a slight relief appeared on his weathered face. I could use that. I'm afraid I might faint again. Then let's go, she said decisively. I'll accompany you, and we'll make the list together. They carefully crossed the street. The water formed deep puddles on the pavement, and the yellow lights of the street lamps cast their shadows on the tiles. The sound of the wind and rain mixed with the echo of their footsteps. Lara noticed how the cars passed by without slowing down, splashing everything in their path. Instinctively, she placed her hand in front of Gabriel to protect him from a spray of dirty water that bounced off the wheel of a speeding vehicle. Watch out, she shouted. It's almost there. In the distance, the glowing sign of the supermarket flickered like an intermittent flame, announcing, "Open 24 hours" in green neon. As they got closer, Lara greeted the security guard, who didn't even look up. "Good evening. Can I bring my companion in?" she asked. "Go ahead," the guard replied with disinterest. "Door on the right." When she opened the large sliding door, a blast of cold air from the freezers mixed with the smell of freshly baked bread and fried chicken from the small deli inside. The sound of the door faded with a sharp click, and the interior of the supermarket immediately offered a much-needed breath of fresh air. The white lights and shiny floors reflected the orderly aisles. Lara took a deep breath, letting the warm air replace the sticky humidity of her clothes. Gabriel, still looking a little lost, leaned against one of the wide shelves, barely able to stay upright. Lara sat next to him on a small bench by the shopping carts. "I'm going to get medicine and hot water," she announced. "Is it okay if I take this?" Gabriel nodded, resting his head against the shelf. "Yes, please. Also, bring me some coffee or tea, whatever you have." Lara smiled gently and stood up to walk down the main aisle. In her mind, she ran through the list. Bottled water, ibuprofen, paracetamol, more rehydration salts, and a can of chicken soup. She also decided to grab a couple of camping thermal blankets from the seasonal section of the store, just in case they needed them. As she walked, she noticed how quiet it was. No internal radio announcements, just the hum of the LED lighting and the distant sound of the central refrigerator fan. In the distance, she spotted the over-the-counter medication section, with white shelves and boxes lined up by category. She walked over with purpose, keeping an eye on Gabriel, and started gathering the necessary items. Suddenly, the wind from the entrance was felt again, and the doors jingling announced that more customers were coming in. Lara, focused on the bottle of ibuprofen, barely lifted her gaze. Little did she know, that calm moment was about to be shattered. The inside of the supermarket was calm, almost eerily silent, blocking out the storm raging outside. Lara moved carefully down the first aisle, pushing a cart that squeaked lightly, while Gabriel followed a few steps behind. The shelves were neatly stocked with various products. Cans of soup, packs of cookies, bottles of water. Everything seemed normal, almost spotless, but the nurse, alert as always, noticed details that gave her a chill. The security cameras, placed strategically at every corner of the aisles, weren't pointed where they should be. One of them was aimed at the wall, leaving the beverage aisle unmonitored. Another was screwed in at an odd angle, focusing on the emergency exit sign, as if someone had intentionally turned it to lose its view. Lara furrowed her brow and moved closer to examine it. "Look, Gabriel, this camera should cover that area, but it's pointing at the ceiling," she said, pointing with her index finger. "Why would they deactivate the cameras?" he asked in a hoarse voice. Lara sighed and continued her visual inspection. Further ahead, as she turned the corner toward the cleaning products section, she noticed the emergency exit door slightly ajar. The latch didn't fit properly. A small gap of about 5 millimeters was enough for a knife or crowbar to force it open. She approached and gently pushed the latch with her thumb, and it gave way without resistance. "This door shouldn't be like this," she said, her frown deepening. "Do you see it shaking? Anyone could open it from the outside with no problem." Gabriel staggered closer, barely able to stand, and placed his hands on the door frame for support. "It could just be carelessness from the security staff," he suggested uncertainly. "Sometimes the guards leave these details for the end of their rounds." "Maybe," Lara replied quietly. "But in this place, it should be checked more carefully, especially at night." She looked at the loudspeakers. They were either off or muted. No announcements broke the stillness. In the dim light of the aisle, the shiny floor reflected the white lights of the ceiling, but there were areas where the bulbs were burnt out, creating dark and elusive patches. In one of them, the shadow of Lara's cart stretched and moved like a fish without water. "Doesn't something feel off?" Gabriel asked, his voice shaky. "I feel like we're alone." Lara looked around and let out a sigh. The calm was too perfect, with no murmur of other customers, no hum from the security system. It was just the two of them, the shelves, and a couple of giant freezers holding frozen goods. They moved toward the over-the-counter medicine aisle, where Lara intended to grab ibuprofen and Band-Aids. Along the way, she noticed an abandoned cart with a thermal bag in the child's seat. No one was coming to collect it, and the checkout area was deserted. The guard who had been dozing by the window was no longer there. His booth was empty. The silence, instead of being calming, pressed down on Lara's chest. Every step creaked on the floor, and her heart beat with a restrained rhythm, listening for any sound. Under the mask covering her mouth, she could feel her pulse racing, as if something hidden lay behind this apparent abandonment. Gabriel, beside her, was breathing with difficulty. The tension had made his hands shake again. Suddenly, a faint squeak sounded behind them, like a cartwheel brushing against a broken tile. Lara spun around quickly, her eyes wide open, but all she saw was the empty aisle and the cart with the thermal bag. She tried to calm herself. "It must be one of the freezers," she murmured, though her voice held more fear than certainty. "Let's finish up quickly." Gabriel nodded, his eyes still fixed on the forgotten bag. Lara left the cart by the pain relief shelf and quickly grabbed what they needed. 2 boxes of ibuprofen, a pack of sterile bandages, and a bottle of hand sanitizer. She turned to call Gabriel, but he had moved ahead a few steps, drawn to the bag. Lara caught up to him just in time. She felt a chill when she realized something wasn't quite right, but it was too late to turn back. The cold from the freezer aisles froze their skin as they entered. The continuous hum of the fans, like a glacial breath, echoed through the aisle while rows of packages and cans lit up with a cold, white light. Lara pushed the cart with medicine and thermal blankets, with Gabriel stumbling beside her at every step. "We're almost there," she said, trying to encourage him. "Just a little more, and we'll find a place where you can sit." He nodded, but his head suddenly spun, and the colors seemed to blur. The aisle stretched out in front of him. He felt cold sweat running down his neck and a ringing in his ears. His pulse was so loud, he could hear it in every vein. He tried to speak, but the words got stuck in his throat. "Lara, dizziness," he tried to say weakly. In an instant, Gabriel lost his balance. His hands grabbed the freezer shelf to avoid falling flat on his face. The cans clinked and dropped to the floor with a dry sound. He leaned forward, his gaze distant, breathing heavily. Lara reacted immediately. She left the cart, moved closer, and carefully wrapped her arms around his waist to hold him up. With one hand on his back, she guided him gently to the floor, pulling him away from the cold shelves. She managed to sit him down softly on a low box, covering him with the thermal blanket she had just bought. "Take it easy, breathe with me," she whispered, bringing her face closer to his. "Inhale, 2-3, and exhale, 2-3. Gabriel closed his eyes and followed Lara's rhythm. The cold of the blanket and the hum of the fans filled his awareness. He felt his pulse throb at his temples, but Lara's voice was a beacon that kept him anchored to the present. "Drink this," she said, handing him the bottle with the rehydration mixture. "It will help calm the dizziness." He looked at her gratefully and took a small sip, letting the warm liquid travel down his throat. With each sip, a sense of relief spread through his chest. Lara, sitting beside him, watched every detail. His sweat-drenched forehead, his nose chilled from the cold, the way his shoulders shook from the effort. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect," Gabriel murmured, his voice barely audible. "These cold aisles confuse me." "It's normal," Lara replied gently. "Going from the wet street into here is a big change. We'll wait a moment before we move on." She reached into her bag for a tissue and wiped his forehead to dry the sweat. Then she looked up at the ceiling. A light bulb flickered at irregular intervals, as if announcing something. But Lara didn't want to think about that right now. She just wanted Gabriel to regain his strength. "How do you feel?" she asked, gently touching his shoulder. Gabriel took a deep breath and let the air out with a long sigh. "Better, thanks to you, nurse," he replied, with a faint smile. "I felt like I was running out of air." "Good," she said, smiling back. "I'll get you something warm to drink, maybe some tea or coffee. Do you like herbal tea?" "Coffee with honey, please," he answered, his tone firmer now. "That'll wake me up." Lara nodded and stood carefully so she wouldn't make him unsteady again. She took the cart and placed it within reach. With a controlled step, she walked over to the hot drink section. In the distance, the sound of a can sliding on the floor reminded her of the incident earlier. She turned instinctively to protect Gabriel, but saw only the quiet aisle and the forgotten thermal bag in the cart. "I'll be right back," she called to Gabriel, though her voice barely broke through the hum of the fans. As she searched for the coffee machine, Lara couldn't stop thinking about Gabriel's vulnerability. A veteran used to extreme climates, now reduced to a fragile man by a simple dizziness. It made her feel responsible for his well-being, especially after finding him at the hospital exit looking lost. "Give me a coffee with 2 teaspoons of sugar and 1 of honey," she said when she reached the machine. The machine hissed, and the aroma of hot coffee rose immediately, filling the air with a comforting fragrance. Lara held the cup with both hands to warm her still numb fingers. When it was ready, she carefully placed it in the cart and returned to Gabriel. "Here you go," she announced, offering it to him. "Drink slowly, it's very hot." He held the cup, took a sip, and closed his eyes. The warmth traveled down his throat, making him let out a small sound of satisfaction. "This is just what I needed," he said, resting his forehead on the cup for a moment. Lara placed a hand on his shoulder and, with a calm smile, whispered, "When you're ready, we'll continue with the shopping. But for now, rest a little." Gabriel nodded and leaned back against the shelf, his gaze lost in an indefinite spot. Lara stayed by his side, vigilant, as the aisle remained silent and the cameras continued to look away from them. Lara held the steaming coffee cup in her left hand, and with her right, she gripped the cart. Gabriel, still sitting next to the freezer shelf, gave her grateful glances with each hot sip. The aisle was quiet, only interrupted by the hum of the fans and the soft echoes of their own whispers. Suddenly, the ceiling light flickered and went out with a sharp snap. Then it flickered again and again. A blinking light created an irregular rhythm above the shelves. Lara looked up, frowning. "Did you hear that?" she asked the veteran in a low voice. "The lights, they shouldn't be failing like that." Gabriel tilted his head, showing both tiredness and suspicion. "There might be an electrical issue," he replied, gently rubbing his forehead. "But with these blackouts, it doesn't feel right." Lara nodded, put the cup in the cart, and took a few steps to inspect the ceiling panels. Several were burnt out, and others flickered with uneven bursts, giving off an unsettling vibe, as if the lights were trying to warn them about something. Just then, the cart moved slightly. The thermal bag they had seen earlier was now resting on the child's seat, swollen as if waiting for someone. No one nearby was claiming it, and there was no guard watching over it. "Look at that cart," Lara pointed out, returning to Gabriel. "It was empty before, and now that bag." He slowly sat up, leaning against the cart for support. With a mix of curiosity and suspicion, he reached for the thermal bag and touched it with his gloved hand. "It's not secured," he commented. "It could be medicine, or maybe something else." Lara leaned in to take a closer look. The bag was half open, as if someone had dropped it in a hurry. There was a faint trace of moisture on it, indicating it had touched the wet floor of the parking lot before coming inside. However, there were no signs of customers or employees around. The checkout counters were empty, the aisle was dark, and there was no sound of footsteps or voices. "What about the guards?" Lara asked, looking up at the security window. "They should be monitoring the entrance of the supermarket." Gabriel looked over at the guard station, where the little red light usually indicated the control post. But there was only dead silence. No sign of the guard who had let them in or the one who had been napping at the counter. The nearby chair was empty, and the lamp on their desk was off. "There's no one there," Gabriel confirmed, raising an eyebrow in surprise. "This isn't normal." Lara held her breath and walked toward the exit door. She carefully pushed it a little, but it was blocked from the outside. There was no lock or internal latch, no sign that someone had closed it from the inside. It simply wouldn't move. "It seems like they're locking everything down," she whispered. "Do you see? This door should open with a simple push." Lara's heart began to race. She looked at Gabriel, whose eyes reflected the same contained alarm. That cart with the abandoned thermal bag was a sign that something was off, and the absence of the guards only added to their unease. "Gabriel, I need you to help me check the security cameras from over there," she said, pointing to the console by the security window. "Maybe we can see who left that bag." He nodded and struggled to stand, leaning on the cart. When they reached the window, he fumbled with the switch that activated the video screen. He pressed button after button, but the console only displayed a no-signal message on each monitor. Beneath the screen, a red LED blinked, indicating the system was on, but no one was operating it. "Nothing's working," Gabriel announced with a tense voice. "There's no feed from any camera." Lara moved closer and placed her hand on the veteran's shoulder. Concern filled her. Everything was becoming stranger and more dangerous. They could stay there, continue shopping, and risk being attacked, or they could try to leave through the main entrance, but they would face the same security issues. At that moment, the aisle went dark again when another bulb burned out in silence. A sharp thud echoed from the end of the aisle, as if a distant cart had collided with a shelf. Lara clenched her jaw and withdrew her hand from Gabriel's shoulder. "Stay close, Gabriel. We're not alone anymore." The light flickered back on with a hiss, revealing the cart with a thermal bag, the camera console showing no footage, and the exit door still closed. No one was visible in the side aisles, only lurking shadows. "The worst is yet to come," Gabriel whispered, holding his breath. The constant hum of the fans was suddenly interrupted when the supermarket's background music stopped abruptly. A dry, almost imperceptible sound announced the opening of the front door, a metallic creak that seemed to echo through the entire aisle. Lara looked up from the cart where the medicine and steaming coffee rested. Beside her, Gabriel quickly finished the last sip of the cup as he regained his breath. "Did you hear that?" Lara whispered, her face tense. Gabriel nodded, frowning. He couldn't respond, as three figures suddenly appeared at the entrance, hooded and walking with determined steps. There was no sound of carts or customer chatter. They simply appeared, like shadows moving across the shiny floor. Lara instinctively stepped back, pulling Gabriel with her. She could see the gleam of tactical flashlights under their hoods and the threatening outline of long rifles held with both hands. The three moved forward without looking at anyone. Their sole mission seemed to be reaching the end of the aisle and blocking the main exit. "Stay still," ordered the first one in a deep voice, his accent echoing off the shelves. "No one move." Lara's heart raced, and she felt her pulse quicken, rising to her throat. Gabriel, whose trembling had barely subsided, gripped the cart with tense fingers, as if searching for an anchor to keep from falling. The hooded figures formed a line in front of the sliding exit door. Two leaned against the sides, while the third, the one who had given the order, positioned himself in the center, blocking any attempt to escape. Lara slowly lowered her hands, making no sudden movements. She remembered the risk management lessons. Keep your hands visible, don't look directly at the weapon, and don't shout. She leaned slightly toward Gabriel, whispering, "Stay calm. I'll talk to them." Gabriel nodded, though his eyes reflected the fear inside him. The nurse took a deep breath and, with a firm voice but without challenging them, addressed the leader. "Please, there doesn't need to be violence. We are two unarmed civilians, and this veteran needs medical help." The hooded man raised his weapon slowly and pointed it directly at Lara's face. The flash of the tactical light reflected off the rifle's barrel, casting a trembling beam of light. The nurse kept her gaze down, aware that any flash could trigger a shot. "Veteran?" the assailant muttered in a deep voice. "Who is he?" "He's a war veteran who left the hospital just a few minutes ago. He felt dizzy. Came with me to get medicine. We don't want trouble." The secondary assailant, on Lara's right, took a few steps forward and scrutinized Gabriel's military coat. Then, with calm seriousness, he ignored everyone else in the store, seemingly looking for something specific. The veteran, his medals, anything that connected to his service memories. The third hooded figure stayed focused on blocking the back door, making sure no one could escape through it. Lara sensed the metallic smell of gunpowder in the air, a mix of fear and threat. Cautiously, she tried to smile to calm Gabriel. "Sir, if you let me talk to my shift supervisor, we can bring medical backup, and everything will be resolved without anyone getting hurt." The assailant pointing the gun at her tilted his head, evaluating her offer. After a tense silence, he lowered the gun slightly, but not enough to disarm it right away. Then, suddenly, the leader raised his arm and muttered a word that Lara couldn't understand. At that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The silence became absolute. Without warning, Lara felt a slight tremor in her stomach, as if something was about to trigger. Behind her, she heard the scrape of Gabriel's boot against the cart. She wanted to turn her head, but the red dot of the laser reminded her of the weapon beside her temple. She couldn't stop the pulse that trembled in her wrist. Just before time shattered and tragedy erupted, she slowly raised her hand, intending to protect the veteran. It was her last conscious thought. She had to put her body between Gabriel and the danger. A deadly silence fell over the supermarket aisle when the hooded leader pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed between the shelves like a dry, icy thunder. Lara felt a brutal impact on the left side of her chest, then another on her right shoulder, and finally the third in her thigh. Each bullet tore a muffled scream from her throat and sent her crashing forward into the cart, which rolled slowly as she faded. Gabriel, stunned and unable to react, let out a trembling scream when he saw Lara fall. The veteran stepped forward, but the line of hooded figures held him back. One of them raised the gun toward Gabriel, the barrel trembling for a moment before pausing. Despite the immense pain, Lara felt her protective instinct push her to put her body between the weapon and the veteran. With extreme effort, she lifted herself slightly and shouted in a broken voice, "Don't shoot him!" The echo of her words rang out in the aisle. The shooter, hearing Lara, hesitated for a moment and shifted the rifle's aim toward the nurse, who was still struggling to stay upright. In that crucial second, Lara pushed the cart with her knee to keep it close and gripped the handle tightly. The third hooded figure, the tallest, stepped forward to aim more clearly. Then, without warning, Lara yelled, "Stop!" Her voice, full of determination and desperation, resounded like an order stronger than any weapon. The leader pulled the trigger again, either by mistake or perhaps intentionally, and the bullet hit Lara in the side, just below her rib. She felt a terrible warmth spread through her body. The floor glistened under her tear-filled, blood-spattered gaze as drops of blood fell from her mouth. The world blurred. Gabriel let go of the cart and ran, shouting with rage, "Lara!" But the attackers didn't back down. They closed ranks around her and the veteran, covering their movements with the coldness of those carrying out a mission without hesitation. The leader placed the barrel against Lara's chest and spat out in a dry voice, "If you don't stop moving, things will get worse." Lara, her pulse slowing and her strength fading, tried to stay conscious. A cold sweat ran down her forehead, mixed with the blood flowing from her wounds. Everything around her spun. The shelves, the sale signs, the flickering light reflections. She smelled the metallic scent of her own blood and the sharp scent of the rifle. With a broken voice, she whispered, "Gabriel, get help please." The veteran, trembling hands and wide eyes, nodded sadly. He tried to stand but felt his legs give way. He heard the second shot that marked the shooter's aim. This time, the bullet grazed the cart and bounced off a nearby shelf. The third assailant stepped forward, holding a flashlight in his free hand and turning on its beam to light up Lara's face. The gunfire suddenly stopped. The leader whispered something incomprehensible into one of his men's ears. They turned their backs on Lara and, with quick, synchronized movements, moved toward Gabriel, dragging him out of the aisle. The veteran struggled, wanting to stay, but they yanked him violently, almost dragging him, and cornered him against the blocked exit door. "Call the police, or this will end badly," Lara shouted, her mouth dry and her vision blurry. The leader smirked cruelly and ordered quietly, "Move her before this ends here." One of the attackers grabbed the cart and pushed it aside. The other bent down toward Lara, and with no compassion, grabbed her shoulders to lift her. With each movement, a searing pain pierced through her. As they lifted her, the nurse clung to the memory of the hero's core that pushed her to protect Gabriel. Before they dragged her down the dark aisle, she managed to see her trembling hands, her uniform splattered with dark droplets, and the cart rolling on its own. In her fragmented consciousness, she heard one last shot. This time, it sounded distant, as if it no longer reached her. She felt the warmth of blood burning in her side, knew her body was giving in, and then the darkness enveloped her. The world collapsed in a burst of flashing lights and sirens that echoed down the aisle like a swarm of angry bees. The pain in Lara's side intensified, becoming a burning fire. She tried to scream, but her voice was drowned in a muffled groan as she felt firm hands pressing makeshift bandages against her wounds. Each bandage, soaked in blood, was a fragile patch on the body of a woman made to heal, not to be healed. Above the noise, she could hear Gabriel's voice, now sharp and broken by fear and confusion. "Lara! Lara, hold on, please!" He had managed to free himself from the attackers and was now kneeling beside her, his trembling hands trying to stop the blood from flowing faster. With uncontrollable shaking, he wrapped a clean cloth around the wound in her thigh, while his other hand pressed a bandage against her side. His tears stained the cloth, mixing with the red liquid that flowed relentlessly. Behind them, the sound of footsteps turned into a chaotic rush. Security guards, frightened customers, and 2 ambulances speeding toward them. The screeching of the automatic doors competing with the sirens created an almost deafening cacophony. One of the paramedics, with a weathered face and expert gaze, took over from Gabriel. With steady, firm hands, he unfolded a folding stretcher, while his partner turned on the red light at the back of the store. "Step aside, please," ordered the first paramedic in an authoritative voice. "We need space." Lara felt her senses struggling to stay awake. Each beat of her heart thundered in her chest, each breath a struggle that cut through her. In her mind, the memories of the night rushed by like quick frames. Gabriel's tired face, the misaligned cameras, the abandoned cart, and the 3 shots that almost took her life. The second paramedic carefully placed Lara onto the stretcher and strapped her in. With white gloves, he examined her wounds. 2 shots to the left side, possible hemothorax. 1 on the right shoulder. "I'll rebandage and apply continuous pressure." The voice faded, as if descending through an endless tunnel. Lara gathered all her strength to open her eyes. Through her half-closed lashes, she saw faces covered by masks, bodies moving urgently, and above all, shadows blending with the flashing lights of the ambulances. She felt the cart roll beside her, and a guard gently holding her hand. "Hold on to her," someone shouted above. "We'll get her to the hospital immediately." The guard nodded and placed the riot vest under Lara's neck as an improvised headrest. He leaned in and whispered, "Stay with us, nurse. Help is almost here." In the darkness of her consciousness, Lara could distinguish the approaching sirens on the wet street, the squeaking of the stretcher wheels as they moved through the door, and the sharp thud as she was loaded into the back of the ambulance. Each sound grew and shrank simultaneously in her mind, like a metronome marking the final pulse of her body. A flash of red and white lights blinded her momentarily. She felt the rattle of the stretcher as it moved up the ramp, the hum of the engines, and the voice of a technician speaking through the intercom. "Breathe with me, please. Inhale, exhale, stay calm." The words faintly reached her mind. She tried to respond, but her throat felt dry and numb. A smell of antiseptic filled the air, and when she opened her eyes again, she saw the stretcher stop with a dry thud against the hospital door. The senior paramedic. "Quick, take her to the emergency operating room." Code red. The stretcher slid down a narrow hallway, passing doors that opened and closed hurriedly. She saw the bounce of her own boots, Gabriel's uniform stained as he followed a few meters behind, before being stopped at the main door to give details. Then, she felt them separate her from the stretcher and a slight tug on her wrist. "I'll apply a firmer bandage," said a professional female voice. Lara surrendered to the pain, letting the darkness grow around her. Each breath became slower, harder, until silence filled her head, completely drowning out the sirens, bandages, and voices that faded away. The silence was so thick that Lara couldn't tell if she had fallen asleep or if she had completely lost track of time. The only sound she could hear was the soft whisper of the ventilators and the faint beeping of the monitors around her. Her body felt numb, as if she were floating somewhere between wakefulness and deep sleep. A constant buzzing surrounded her, and the fresh air entering her nostrils felt like relief, though she couldn't tell if it was the hospital's air or something else. In her ears, the beating of her heart echoed loudly. However, the stillness of the environment made her feel strange, as if she weren't completely there. She couldn't see bright lights or moving shadows around her. Everything was hazy and blurred, like being trapped in a thick fog. All she could hear was the sound of air, the slow, steady rhythm of the artificial breathing. Suddenly dry, firm footsteps echoed near her stretcher. Her eyes, still closed, tried to focus on the shadow passing close by. She couldn't move her arms, but her breathing was becoming deeper. Someone or something was approaching with a measured, deliberate step. "Keep her stable," said a deep male voice, one Lara barely recognized, but that made her tense. The sensation of not being alone made her wake up a little more, but she still couldn't fully open her eyes. The sound of footsteps came closer, and she could feel someone near her. The stretcher under her body shifted slightly, and someone adjusted the ventilator, pressing a button that allowed her to breathe more easily. The sound of the mechanical ventilator helping her breathe became clearer, and the monitors started emitting a faint beep, as if the readings were stabilizing. Lara tried to move her fingers, but pain shot through her body like lightning, and her muscles didn't respond as they should. A shiver ran down her spine, and the feeling of disorientation grew stronger. What had happened? Where was she? In the middle of that fog of confusion, a new voice broke the stillness of the room, this time closer to her face. "She's conscious, but her breathing is still a bit unstable. The shots didn't hit vital organs, but she lost a significant amount of blood. We need to be careful with infections." The male voice sounded authoritative, but at the same time, it carried a contained calm. Lara tried to process the words, but a sharp pain made her squeeze her eyes shut even harder. There were lighter footsteps and a whispered conversation. "How long has it been?" asked a female voice, probably a nurse or doctor. "About 15 minutes since we got here. She's reacting well, but we'll need to monitor her longer." It was much harder for Lara to react. She tried to speak, but her lips barely moved. Finally, she managed to whisper a broken word, like a thread coming from her throat. "Gabriel." The footsteps stopped. An uncomfortable silence settled, and Lara felt the weight of growing anxiety. "He's safe, Lara," a calm voice responded. "He's safe now. They evacuated him before we arrived." The relief was immediate but fleeting. Lara tried to open her eyes, but the effort was in vain. All she managed to see was a flash of red lights and the blurry outline of figures moving quickly. "He's out of danger, but we can't neglect her," said another voice sharper. "We need her to recover quickly." The sound of a machine in the background switched off, and the male voice spoke again. "Are we ready to move her? It's a security risk if she stays here too long. Let's wait a little longer." The response was firm, but carried an undeniable tone of concern. Lara, barely opening her eyes, could make out shadows approaching her stretcher. It was as if everything around her started to fit together in her mind, but without clarity. She was in a hospital, she was alive, and Gabriel was safe. But there was something else. Something bigger, something she couldn't fully understand yet. The voices continued to talk in a disordered way, as if they were miles away. But there was something familiar in their tone. She knew she wasn't alone. Something inside her told her that this mission, this moment, was just the beginning of something much bigger. Lara woke up with a strange feeling, as if she were floating between sleep and wakefulness. The first sound she heard was the soft beep of a monitor, along with the constant hum of the ventilators. Something was pressing on her chest, not painfully, but with the sense that something was different. A couple of deep breaths made her realize she was in a hospital. As her eyes slowly opened, the first thing she saw was the white light of the ceiling above her, followed by the shadows moving around her. Around her, the figures of several people moved with a speed and precision that only a highly trained team could have. At first, Lara's vision was blurry, but soon she could distinguish the faces of some men and women in dark uniforms. She couldn't remember how she had ended up there, but the voices and familiar figures made her feel a little calmer. "She's conscious," said a deep, familiar voice. Lara tried to focus and recognized the tone of one of the SEAL team members. Beside her, a nurse adjusted the IVs while another technician checked the monitors. Each of them seemed busy with their task, but there was something in the air, a palpable tension that hadn't been there before. "Gabriel?" Lara asked in a broken voice, her lips dry and her throat sore from the effort to speak. One of the figures beside her leaned in, gently placing a hand on her arm. His face, now clearer in her vision, was that of a man she hadn't known before, but seemed to know her very well. "He's safe, Lara," he said calmly. "They evacuated him before the ambulance arrived. The team protected him." Lara tried to process the words. Gabriel, the veteran, was safe. That should have given her peace, but it didn't. A sense of discomfort, as if there was something more important to understand, filled her. She raised her head slightly, but the effort made her dizzy. "What happened?" she asked, frowning. "How did I get here?" The man, now recognized as part of the SEAL team, looked at her seriously. "We found you in the supermarket," he replied. "It was a quick evacuation. You were shot 3 times, but you're out of danger. You're lucky." Lara felt a knot form in her stomach. She remembered the nightmare of the shots, the urgency, the fear. The attempt to protect Gabriel, to stay on her feet, to say something. The effort now felt like a bad dream she had just woken from. "Why did they do it? Why did they attack me and not him?" she asked, looking the SEAL in the eyes, searching for answers that didn't seem so clear. The man watched her in silence for a moment before replying. "That's what we don't know, but we think the attack had a bigger objective. They weren't just trying to rob or intimidate. We believe this assault had something to do with Gabriel, and we're not sure what that is yet. That's why we need you to stay quiet about what happened." Lara felt a chill run down her spine. The uncertainty surrounded her, and although the information was limited, something in her instinct told her that this story was just beginning. "Are they going to capture him?" she asked, a hint of hope in her voice. The SEAL nodded slowly. "Yes, this is all connected to something much bigger than you can imagine. But don't worry, Gabriel is safe. And that's what matters now." Lara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over her. She knew that her mission to protect Gabriel had been successful, but the feeling of discomfort lingered, as if something else was about to happen. The soft hum of the machines around her seemed to be the only constant in Lara's mind as she tried to absorb the information being given to her. Her breathing, though more controlled now, was still a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. Around her, the SEAL team members stayed alert, the air thick with tension that Lara could feel in every fiber of her being. One of the team members, with a serious look, stepped closer to her stretcher, his firm steps echoing on the ICU floor. "Lara," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "we know what happened at the supermarket was an attempted capture, but we need you to keep quiet about everything that happened here. There are still too many unknowns, and every detail matters." Lara stared at him, trying to understand the full scope of what he was saying. She had felt the pressure of the gunshots, the need to protect Gabriel, and the impact her injuries had caused. But the fact that her life had been part of a much bigger plan left her confused. "Capture the veteran?" she asked, her voice still heavy with fatigue. The SEAL nodded, his dark eyes locked onto hers. "Yes, Gabriel isn't just any veteran. We suspected it from the moment of the attack, but we need to be sure. This is all connected to something much bigger than we think. And now, we have to keep it quiet. We can't risk any more lives." Lara nodded slowly, though her mind was still processing the information cautiously. Why would they want to capture someone like Gabriel? His life had been shaped by years of service and sacrifice. What connection did he have to this attack? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit vaguely, but there was something in her telling her that many pieces were still missing. "And what happens now?" she asked, feeling the exhaustion in her shoulders. The SEAL stepped closer, his face stern. "Now we need you to follow the silence protocol, Lara. We're protecting Gabriel, but we also need to protect everyone who might be involved. There are likely more people looking for what he knows, and we have to do it quietly. This isn't just another robbery, it's something much bigger." Lara stayed silent, processing everything he had said. She knew her mission to protect Gabriel wasn't over, and now she found herself caught in something much more complex, with pieces still missing. "What should I do then?" she asked, looking at the SEAL with determination. "Recover, stay calm, and wait. The team is working on it. Don't worry about anything else right now. What happened is being handled, and we need you to follow the procedures." "Procedures?" Lara asked, more confused than ever. "Yes, the Code 3 protocol is in effect, but it all depends on your discretion. No one can know more than what you've seen. The goal is to keep control without the public finding out. The worst part is that someone else could be following us without us knowing." A chill ran down Lara's spine as she heard those words. Not only had she been a witness to an attack, but she was now trapped in a much bigger web, one she didn't fully understand yet. But she knew one thing for sure. Her mission to protect Gabriel had become much more crucial. Lara woke up with sharp pain coursing through her body. The first thing she felt was the discomfort of the bandages covering her wounds, now replaced by thicker patches. As her mind cleared, the memory of the attack came rushing back. The gunshots, the darkness of the store, the adrenaline of the situation. But now here, in an isolated hospital room, physical pain was all she could feel clearly. The SEAL team had made it clear that she had to stay silent, but fear still pulsed at her chest, a fear she couldn't shake. The doctors, like the soldiers, had been discreet with her, not wanting to say much about what had happened. Lara knew her experience went beyond a simple assault, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that something more was going on, something much bigger than the attack itself. Maybe she was being used as a piece in a game she didn't fully understand. A couple of nurses entered carefully, checking the 4 lines and monitoring the machines beside her bed. Lara watched them, her head slightly resting on the pillow, trying not to make a sound. "How do you feel?" one of the nurses asked as she adjusted her medication dose. "Hurts," Lara replied, squinting her eyes. "But I can handle it." The nurse nodded with a slight smile, knowing that recovery would be long but necessary. "You're being well taken care of. The SEAL team made sure you're safe here." Lara barely managed to respond. The words seemed distant, as if her body was reacting to everything, but her mind still clung to that feeling of insecurity. Something inside her told her that she wasn't out of danger yet, despite appearances. The nurse left her alone for a moment, and Lara stared at the sterile white ceiling. Something felt out of place, but she couldn't define what it was. She tried to focus on what the doctors were saying, but her thoughts kept returning to the moment of the attack. The pain in her body was constant, but there was something else, an inner unease she couldn't silence. That's when she saw something strange. As she adjusted in bed and tried to sit up, something fell to the floor, right next to her pillow. It was a small note, carefully folded, almost invisible between the sheets. Her heart skipped a beat, the same way it had when she heard the sound of a gunshot, the same way it had kept her alert since the first moment of the assault. With trembling hands, Lara picked it up. The note, handwritten in unfamiliar handwriting, simply said one word: Cold 03. Her mind began to make connections, but she couldn't form a clear link. What did it mean? Was it a warning? A code? Something inside her told her not to ignore it. That simple note seemed to be the key to something much bigger. With effort, she got out of bed and started searching her memories, trying to make sense of what had happened. Cold 03. It seemed like a cryptic message, but who was it for? And why had it appeared right under her pillow? The silence in the room became unbearable as her thoughts crowded in. Lara knew something important was happening, and this small detail could be the answer to the uncertainty gnawing at her stomach. She wanted to ask someone, but she knew she had to remain silent. The SEAL team had been clear. Nothing could be shared, nothing that might compromise what was at stake. Soon after, the door opened softly, and the nurse came back, bringing some water and more medicine. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked, noticing the concerned expression on Lara's face. "Yes, but—" Lara tucked the note carefully under the blanket in her hand. "I have a strange feeling, like I'm trapped in something bigger than I can understand." The nurse looked at her, a bit surprised, but didn't say anything. She just nodded and offered the medicine. "It's normal to feel that way. You're recovering. Rest." Lara watched her leave the room, and a feeling of unease grew in her chest. The message, Cold 03, continued to echo in her mind. Was it a clue about something to come? Or just a warning that everything she'd experienced so far was only the beginning? Night had fallen at the hospital, and the heavy silence that filled the halls was only broken by the distant beeping of monitors and the murmurs of night guards. Lara, still recovering, was alone in her room, her thoughts intertwined with the uncertainty of everything that had happened, leaving her with a feeling that the attack had not been a simple robbery, but part of something much bigger. With the dim light from her bedside lamp, Lara flipped through the note with the code Cold 03 again. The feeling of being part of something bigger than herself sank deep into her bones. But she had no answers, only questions. Still, she forced herself to keep going, to stay calm, knowing she couldn't give in to fear. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but sleep wouldn't come. The nightmares from that night mixed with images of the supermarket attack. Her mind couldn't stop replaying every detail, as if searching for something that had been overlooked. Something that could change the reality that was closing in on her. The sound of the fan in her room suddenly stopped, and the air became heavy, as if an invisible shadow had settled over her. Then, she heard a soft knock at her door. At first, she thought it was just her nerves, but then the sound repeated. A soft but firm knock, as if someone was trying not to draw too much attention. Lara quickly got up, ignoring the pain from her wounds. She cautiously approached the door, unsure who could be on the other side. Her heart raced. She slowly opened the door, keeping her hand on the doorknob, ready for the unexpected. But no one was there. Only a shadow passed quickly down the hallway. Lara squinted, trying to see beyond, but she couldn't make out anything in the darkness. The hallway was empty. Then suddenly, her room's door slammed shut. A chill ran down her spine. The feeling of vulnerability she had been trying to ignore engulfed her again. Something wasn't right. Without thinking, she stepped back and started searching for her phone. The phone rang in her hand, and a notification appeared on the screen. A missed call. It was from the same number she had seen on her device earlier. The unknown number that always showed up when something was wrong. A knot formed in her stomach. Suddenly, the door burst open. Two hooded figures rushed into the room, and before Lara could react, the lights went out, plunging everything into complete darkness. "Get out!" a voice shouted. There was no time to think. Lara tried to move, but a strong arm grabbed her by the neck and shoved her against the wall. The pressure on her throat was immediate, But so was the sound of hurried footsteps coming closer. Her mind raced, searching for answers, but all she could do was cling to her instincts. The same urgency and danger she had felt during the supermarket attack returned, and with it, the determination not to let anyone take control of her life. With a quick and calculated move, Lara took advantage of the assailant's distraction to break free and run toward the window. She quickly yanked it open, and instantly she collapsed on the windowsill, breathing in fresh air, still in panic. It wasn't the right time to escape, but she couldn't just stay there doing nothing. The attackers, seeing the window open, didn't hesitate to rush toward it. "Don't move," they yelled. But Lara had already reached the emergency phone switch, turning on the hallway light. For a moment, it felt like the military forces she had seen in action during the attack were focusing in that instant. A flash of light in the darkness that made her feel more alive than ever. Without thinking more, she pressed the emergency button. The light flickered back on, but it was too late. The masked men had already escaped. The sound of heavy footsteps was quickly approaching her door. Lara braced herself for the worst, but there was no time to think further. Just before someone reached her room, she heard the faint sound of a siren in the distance muffled. She knew what that meant. Her instincts had led her to do the right thing. The SEAL team, who had been in the shadows all this time, was close. Protection had finally arrived. Lara had waited with her heart in her throat, her mind clouded by exhaustion and pain. But now, after everything she had been through, she couldn't stay still. She had made the decision not to be an easy target, not to be dragged along as just another pawn in this game that seemed beyond her control. The SEAL team had been clear. She was an important piece. And though she had witnessed the brutality of the attack, now, more than ever, she felt ready to take charge of her own fate. While in the ICU, surrounded by the screens that recorded her recovery and the constant surveillance of the military personnel, Lara organized her thoughts. She knew it wasn't enough to hide, and that Gabriel wasn't the only target. If there was one thing she had learned that night, it was that the web that was hunting them was far more complex than she had thought. A SEAL team, led by the same captain who had been with her in the recovery room, entered her room for another assessment. "How are you feeling, Lara?" asked the captain, his voice deep but warm, as he approached the edge of her bed. Lara looked at him with determination. Despite the fatigue that hit her in every muscle, her voice came out firm, without hesitation. "I'm fine," she said, though it wasn't entirely true. Her body was full of scars, but her mind was more alert than ever. "But we need to do something before they keep attacking us. I can't just sit here waiting to be another victim." The captain observed her silently for a few seconds, as if evaluating every word she said. Finally, he nodded, as if he had been expecting this reaction. "We knew this," he replied. "What do you propose?" Lara didn't hesitate for a second. Her experience as a nurse and her sharp survival instincts had led her to this conclusion. "What we need is a trap. A medical trap. Something that will attract them without putting civilians at risk. I'd suggest using a decoy ambulance. But this time, the ambulance won't just be a vehicle. It will have the Code 3 protocol activated. If the attackers follow the trail, they'll come straight for us." The captain raised an eyebrow, surprised by the clarity of her plan. "Are you sure this will work?" he asked, a mix of distrust and respect in his tone. "Yes," Lara said firmly. "We can't keep being the easy prey. They're after something, and we know that something is connected to Gabriel. But he's not the only one in danger. I am too. And if we follow them, if we act fast, we can surprise them before they find us." The captain paused, absorbing Lara's words. Finally, he smiled with a mix of pride and admiration. "You're braver than I thought." He motioned to one of the soldiers by the door. "Prepare the Code 3 protocol." "You're right, Lara. This isn't over, and we'll need all the strategy you can offer." Lara felt a strange sensation, as if, finally, she was taking control. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together. Her courage, her knowledge of medical procedures, and her experience as someone who had been attacked had led her to this point. Now, the SEAL team and she had to work together to make sure the enemy fell into their trap. Hours later, as the sun began to set, Lara was being transferred to a special ambulance. The security teams had organized everything meticulously. No one was to know she was part of the operation, and her identity had to remain anonymous. Lara looked out the window, aware that everything she had done so far could lead to a deadly trap. But something inside her told her that this was the only way to win. She wasn't just fighting for her own life, but for the lives of everyone she had sworn to protect. "Let's go get them," Lara said, gritting her teeth, with the determination of a woman who would not give in to adversity. The loading dock was dark, with the truck lights flickering irregularly, as if something in the air had stopped. Lara, hidden in the ambulance, could feel the tension building in her chest. The distant sound of sirens, the approaching vehicles. It all signaled that the moment of the trap was near. She couldn't see outside, but her mind had already begun to anticipate what would happen. Inside the ambulance, everything was in absolute silence. Lara could barely hear her own controlled breathing, trying not to give herself away. She knew the SEAL team was waiting in the shadows, ready to strike the attackers as soon as the opportunity presented itself. The order was clear. Don't risk civilian lives, but surprise the attackers. The darkness of the dock had become their ally. Suddenly, the radio in the ambulance crackled, and the voice of the SEAL team captain filled the air sharply. "Everything's set, Lara. Move in 3 minutes. Stay calm. Everything will be fine." Lara's heart beat faster when she heard his voice, full of authority, but also with the assurance that everything she had proposed was now in motion. There was no turning back. In the distance, the first sounds of engines began to echo in the stillness of the dock. The attackers were close, too close, and Lara could see, through the side window of the ambulance, 3 vehicles stopping in front of the dock entrance, like pieces of a puzzle fitting perfectly. Behind their mask-covered faces, she could see the determination of those who wanted to seize the opportunity. The ambulance stopped next to a cargo truck, where a side door opened, letting in a rush of cold, heavy air. Lara felt the pressure in her stomach as she waited. The attackers had fallen into the trap, and the SEAL team knew there was no turning back. At that moment, the SEAL team moved in, silent as shadows. A few flashes of light illuminated the dock, and the sound of heavy footsteps from the soldiers echoed in the distance. Skillfully, the SEAL team surrounded the attackers, without making a sound. Lara could only see the moving shadows and the flashing lights of the flashlights in the darkness. It was then that the SEAL leader gave the signal. "Now, open fire!" The gunfire erupted immediately, but in a split second, the lights of the dock came on, and the attackers, caught off guard, fell under the force of the offensive. The sound of gunshots and screams mixed, but Lara, from her hiding spot, could see how the men fell one by one. The attackers, overwhelmed, tried to regroup, but the SEAL team's quick reaction had trapped them. Amid the chaos, Lara saw Gabriel, who had been evacuated by the SEALs, being taken to a security truck. Their eyes met for a moment, and she could only nod, relieved to see him safe, though her mind couldn't fully calm down. At the far end of the dock, in the heart of the operation, one of the hooded men was cornered and captured. The SEAL leader approached him firmly. "Speak! Who gave the order?" he asked, pointing his weapon at the man with determination. The attacker didn't respond immediately, but a couple of seconds later, the words came out begrudgingly. "The internal link. It's someone inside the hospital." The SEAL signaled to his team to take him away quickly. They didn't need more information to know that the network had been dismantled, but now the next step was to uncover the traitors inside the hospital. With the leader in custody and the rest of the attackers neutralized, The SEAL team proceeded to search the area to make sure no detail was left unresolved. Gabriel was evacuated in an armored vehicle and taken to a safe place, while Lara watched from her hiding spot, satisfied that the trap had worked. Back at the hospital, the SEAL team began dismantling the internal links of the network. The link inside the hospital was clear, and the captured leader would soon provide more answers. Lara knew this was just the beginning, but she had done what she had to do: protect Gabriel and take down the attackers. Lara sat in her office chair, looking out the hospital window. The evening wind shook the tree branches, but her mind was still focused on everything that had happened over the last few weeks. The operation, the attacks, the quick decisions. Everything had happened so fast, but now, after the arrests in 3 cities, it seemed that the attackers' network was finally being dismantled. Through the reports, Lara could see the pieces starting to fit together. But at the same time, she knew that remnants of the network still lurked in the shadows. The SEAL team had worked effectively, arresting key members of the organization in several cities. The capture of the leader had revealed a vast system of connections, including traitors within the health institutions, like the hospital where Lara worked. The internal ties weren't a surprise to her, but knowing that there were people involved in her own environment troubled her deeply. Despite it all, everyone's work had been meticulous, and the relief she felt from Gabriel's safety kept her going. "Everything's under control, Lara," said the SEAL team captain during a final meeting at the hospital. His tone was calm but firm, the kind only someone with his experience could have. Lara nodded slowly, though a part of her still felt the job wasn't finished. The Code 3 protocol was in place. She had proposed the protocol to protect the veterans, and now, with the network partially dismantled, she needed to implement her recommendations at the hospital. "We need to strengthen security and ensure any internal leaks are eliminated. We can't afford more risks," Lara replied, not taking her eyes off the report in front of her. The captain looked at her, impressed by how clearly and determinedly she spoke. "Exactly, Lara. We know you've been leading from within, but now we'll let you continue with the Code 3 protocol. This isn't over yet, but we're very close to finishing it." Lara smiled with a mix of relief and regret. It wasn't just about protecting Gabriel. It was about a much bigger system, a system that needed to be controlled. She got up from the chair and started reviewing the hospital's protocol, making sure each measure was well-structured and coordinated. The words Code 3 echoed in her mind, symbolizing a crucial step in her fight. The hospital wouldn't just be a place for healing. It would be a bastion of protection for the most vulnerable. All the protocols she had suggested, and were now being put in place, were just part of the bigger effort needed to ensure the veterans were safe. Even though she knew the attacker's shadow still lingered, she also knew the hospital was now ready for the worst. Implementing the protocol would be a long and complicated process, but Lara was determined. Each day would be another step toward the safety of those being targeted, including the innocent who had never been part of this chaos. She had decided that she wouldn't let her efforts go to waste, that her colleagues and the veterans would get the protection they deserved. Despite the exhaustion, the internal struggle that kept her awake at night, and the consequences the battle had left on her body, Lara felt stronger than ever. Not only had she survived, but she had taken control of what was happening around her. Now, it was she who set the pace. Lara finished her workday at the hospital like any other. She had spent the morning reviewing the Code 3 protocol reports, making sure every aspect of the security measures was in place. Although the attacker's network had been mostly dismantled, Lara knew she could never fully relax. There would always be a shadow of danger lurking, and her work would never truly be finished. That afternoon, after leaving the office where she had spent hours going over papers, she headed to the break room for a pause. The fatigue had caught up with her, but the feeling of having done the right thing, of staying one step ahead, kept her going. As she walked down the hallway to her locker, The tension in her shoulders began to fade, but just as she was about to open her locker door, something caught her attention. A small rectangular box was carefully placed on top of her locker. No one was in sight, and the hallway was quiet. Lara furrowed her brow, approached slowly, and carefully picked up the box. It didn't seem to belong to any of her co-workers or hospital staff. Her name was written on the box in unfamiliar handwriting. With slightly trembling hands, she opened it and found a small, challenging coin, dense and made from a material she couldn't immediately identify. The coin had 3 distinct notches along its edge, as if it was meant to be a token of challenge, a clear sign that whoever left it for her had something to communicate. Alongside the coin was a small note, folded carefully. Lara, feeling a mix of curiosity and alertness, slowly unfolded it. The ink on the note was fresh, but the handwriting was firm and direct. "If you are ever sought, knock 3 times. The message made her stop dead in her tracks. It wasn't an ordinary message, and she knew it. The coin, with its notches, seemed to serve some purpose, something only the person who left it could understand. Lara held it in her hand, feeling the weight of the situation. The tension returned to her chest. She knew this message meant something. It wasn't a coincidence. Her mind started racing, reviewing everything that had happened. Who left this? Why her? What did the 3 notches mean? It all pointed to the same mystery. There was more at play, something still to be uncovered. Footsteps echoed down the hall, and Lara quickly slipped the coin into her pocket before closing her locker. She couldn't let anyone see her with the coin, not yet. She had to think about her next move, how to decipher this new puzzle. However, something deep inside her knew that this coin would mark the beginning of another stage, one that would pull her deeper into the game that seemed to be woven around her. Despite the mystery, Lara couldn't help but smile. It was a small smile, but full of determination. She knew life wouldn't give her a break, that danger and intrigue would continue to be part of her path. But she also knew she wouldn't let it overwhelm her. She was ready for whatever came next. This coin, with its 3 notches, was a sign. There was more to discover, something she couldn't fully see yet, but was about to face. Lara stood up and, with a deep breath, began walking toward the exit, ready to return to work. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength and determination she had shown so far. The coin was just the beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and give a like so you won't miss more stories like this one. See you next time.